Welcome to Coffee and Clarity, Preventing Substance Misuse. I'm your host, Michelle Esquivel. Today, I'm having a conversation with Tim Murray, the Executive Director of Bravo Zulu House. Tim's journey from personal struggle to founding Trinity Sober Homes is not just inspiring, but also paving the way for new resources in Martin County. Join us on uncovering the story behind Tim's mission, the unique approach of Bravo Zulu House, and its impact on veterans struggling with PTSD and substance use disorder. So Tim, can you please share with us your personal journey with addiction and recovery and how it led to you becoming involved with the Trinity Sober Houses?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for inviting me today. It's wonderful, having been a former professor, it's wonderful to see our youth being so sophisticated and competent. So good job at doing this.
Thank you.
So my journey was basically not unlike most people who struggle with drugs and alcohol. On the outside, I looked like a relatively, successful person, a father, a business person. But on the inside, I was slowly but surely becoming an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. And I just simply thought that drinking was something that successful people did. And frankly, for a while, it worked, as we say in recovery, until it stopped working. Mm-hmm. And there's this whole idea that if you're somebody who's prone to addiction, that you can be a cucumber for a while, but eventually you're going to turn into a pickle. And once you turn into a pickle, you're never going back to being a cucumber. So once I became a pickle, I realized, I need some help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you guys have beef with pickles?
Yeah. No, we don't mind pickles. It's just sometimes people understand the difference between you start out as a cucumber. Some people stay as a cucumber, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. They might be heavy drinkers, or they might be somebody who occasionally abuses drugs and alcohol. But there's a bunch of us, about 10% of the population, that eventually become pickles, which is somebody who's addicted to drugs or alcohol.
What inspired you and Colonel Father Martin Fleming to establish the Trinity Sober Homes back in 2011?
Sure. So I showed up on Father Fleming's doorstep. Mm-hmm. I might have looked this good. I definitely didn't smell this well. And I'd been living in my car for a while. And Father and Humpty Dumpty's men put, this Humpty Dumpty back together again. And after I was living with Father for about 6 months, Father was the Army General Chaplain in the U.S. Army, which meant all the chaplains in the U.S. Army reported to him, and he reported to General Colin Powell. Father liked to mix his Catholic and his military terms, and so he sat me down one day, and he liked to hunch himself over, and he liked to sort of peek out when he was talking, and he said, "Tim, I've received inside word that my transfer papers to purgatory are being processed, and I'd like you to join me on a mission to roll out a series of faith-based sober houses. What do you think?" Mm-hmm. So I tell people, hey, if you think it's hard to say no to a priest, try saying to one who was also a colonel. Mm-hmm. And at that time I said, well, Father, I don't know, because, I think I told you I'm kind of a big deal, because, back when I used to be who I thought I was a really big deal, and if you didn't think so, I would have told you. And but I'd been living with for a while, and it had been working for me. I was staying sober, and so I said, well, okay, Father, I'll tell you what. Give me one really good reason. Give me one really good reason to do this, and I'll do it. And without even hesitating, and maybe the viewers out there can understand every once in a while, sometimes you just hear the truth, whether you think it's from God or the universe, and the person you're talking to is just a channel, right? It comes down and then out. And so I said, just give me one good reason. And without even hesitating, he says, Tim, as I have done for you, go forth and do for others. Mm-hmm. And of course I was like, that's a really good reason. That's a really good reason. Yeah. So that started a journey, and now 13 years later, we have 50 beds in the Twin Cities and also down in Waseca County that spread over 4 buildings. We have over 450 men who have been with us, and we have the highest post-treatment recovery rate in the nation at 71%. And this is really driven by 3 components. One, at the encouragement of Father, we do spiritual coaching. The second is we have beautiful homes and third is that we have private rooms rather than putting guys 2 or maybe 4 to a room. About a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, we took a look and said, where else could we be helping people?
Yeah.
And then that's when we came up with the idea of Bravo Zulu House.
And what like really inspired you for Bravo Zulu House?
So for Bravo Zulu House, I would say the same thing that inspired me to do Trinity was I realized as I looked at all the men who were successful in their recovery, who were staying sober, that were living lives that were happy, joyous, and free, and they seemed to have a certain ability to just let sort of life roll off their back, sort of like a duck with water, right? No matter what happened, they seemed to be, content, and I wanted that. And one of the things I noticed was whether a guy's had 5 years, 20 years, or 50 years, they had figured out how to weave the recovery-related activities, 12-step meetings, sponsoring men, doing service work, helping other alcoholics, had woven that into their life. And I think I knew myself well enough that if I didn't do that, I could easily talk myself into saying, I haven't got time for this 12-step stuff. I'm going to just, I'm going to go back and be a business stud. Yeah. And I would eventually end up relapsing like I saw many, many men do. I just didn't want to do that. So whether it was Trinity or eventually Bravo Zulu, this has basically become my purpose in life. I think the greatest gift that one person can give another, as Father did to me, is he gave me my purpose in life. And so Trinity Sober Homes was simply an opportunity for me to turn around and take the tools and the gifts that I've been blessed with, and instead of using them selfishly, which got me right in the bottom of a bottle and broke spiritually, financially, emotionally, and maybe take these gifts and talents that I've got and use them for the benefit of others. So about a year and a half ago, when we took a look at the marketplace and we said, well, where else could our sober home model work? We learned that there's this tragic rate. So for example, in the time we're meeting here today, at least one military veteran will kill himself. So 22 to 40 veterans a day kill themselves. And the vast majority of these veterans are struggling with PTSD. And while many people know that, one of the things I didn't know, and we're here to let people know, is the vast majority of veterans dealing with PTSD self-admit abusing drugs and alcohol. And basically what they're saying is, look, of course I'm abusing drugs and alcohol because I'm really not getting the help I need, or whatever help I'm getting isn't working, so I need drugs and alcohol. And so you have a whole bunch of those cucumbers that eventually turn into pickles, and now they've got a double whammy problem. They've got drug abuse, chemical addiction, drinking, and PTSD. So we decided that after looking around for all the different solutions that were out there, and we said, you know what, we need to do something about this.
Yeah. And that's just amazing what you're doing in the cities and now here in our community.
Yeah, so we'll be starting Bravo Zulu House. We've already purchased a farm just in the northeast corner of Martin County. We're remodeling that. We're working with a number of local businesses like we have Hins and Hins Brothers, Bouquet Lumber, Dan's Appliances. The Chamber of Commerce has been very supportive. So we're growing a list of businesses as well as community organizations. Doug Landsteiner as the County Veteran Service Officer, Steve Fosness as the local American Legion, Pete Henniger with VFW. These are all people who've come together because you can't do a project like this unless you have a community that says, we want to help you.
Yeah. And could you talk a little more on the significance of the name Bravo Zulu House and how it reflects on the mission of value of organization?
Sure. When we took a look at this clear connection in our mind between suicide, PTSD, and drug addiction, it became very clear that the number one barrier to effectively treating PTSD is lack of sobriety. So anybody who knows anyone who's in chemical addiction and they're struggling trying to get sober, it's almost impossible to get them to say, hey, I know, let's go do some counseling. Let's go talk to a pastor. Let's go talk to a therapist. Basically, those people are like, I want nothing to do with that. So you can take a vet and try to give them PTSD therapy all you want, but until you get sober, you might as well just be pouring water on a rock. So what we know is we got to get these guys sober first. The problem is when veterans are walking out of a treatment center, they've really only been addressing their chemical addiction. The real underlying big problem is PTSD. You know, in the 12-step programs, we have a sort of a little riddle, so you seem pretty sharp. You ready for it? Okay, so if you take a drunken horse thief and you sober that person up, what do you now have?
A horse thief.
A sober horse thief. Very good. So you have a sober horse thief. So if you take a drunken or drug-addicted soldier who has PTSD and you sober them up, what do you have?
A PTSD.
You have a sober PTSD-afflicted soldier. Yeah. So people ask me, where's ground zero for homeless vets? My strong opinion is it's the day that gentleman walks out of treatment with sobriety, but no track to run on for his PTSD. Yeah. So that's why we've designed this, and we're the only all-military sober house in the country that's going to provide not only a sober living environment, which is brand new to many of us, but also partnering with local healthcare organizations, providing mental health services, and also doing what we call sneaky therapy. So sneaky therapy is every one of our guys is going to have a dog assigned to them. And we're going to be working with Ava with Pause for Cause from Blue Earth, and she'll be working and assigning a dog to every veteran. And the combination of a sobriety environment plus PTSD therapy plus dogs, we think is going to be a real winning combination. Yeah. We picked the name Bravo Zulu because, one, we wanted a name that immediately screams military. And, you know, there are many great names of many organizations, but, you know, typically this place might be called something like, you know, the Serenity Farm, or, you know, Prairie View, or something like that, which is great, and there are organizations that have those names, but to me that doesn't, from a marketing standpoint, doesn't scream Bravo Zulu, doesn't scream military. The other thing is that for those Navy veterans out there, Bravo Zulu is the highest compliment that you can pay a sailor in the Navy. It means job well done. So when a Navy group has come back from a mission and it's been extraordinarily well executed, the admiral will fly two flags, the Bravo and the Zulu flag, as a symbol that says, job well done.
And that's just amazing that you took the time to think through like what their thought process might be when thinking, oh, I don't want to go to a prairie home. I want to go to Bravo Zulu.
Right, and good point is the other thing we wanted to think through is the words Bravo Zulu mean job well done. So we want that to last for their life. So we wanted to say job well done for serving our country, job well done for having the courage to go to treatment, job well done for having the courage to go to a sober house, and then as alumni, job well done of now living a life that is free of drugs and alcohol, and as a productive member of society with your PTSD, you know, being managed and under control. And then eventually, job well done for being an alumni and coming back and helping the men that are here today.
And what motivated you to specifically address the combination of PTSD and substance misuse disorder with military community?
So as we talked a little bit about, it became very clear to us that the need for an all-military sober house really leapt out when I started speaking with veterans who had gone through treatment. So for your audience, the big numbers is last year 3 million people in the United States went to treatment. So just people. Of those 3 million, roughly 12% were veterans. Now these are not, let's say, the chronically homeless vet. These are people just like your dad, your brother, your grandpa, average age 43, and there were 360,000 of those people that went to treatment last year. This disease affects men to women about 2 to 1, which means 240,000 veteran men, or 20,000 a month, are coming out of treatment somewhere in the country. So 20,000, and the vast majority of these guys have some level of PTSD. So some subsegment of that 20,000 are coming out of treatment, sober, now with no place to go that's going to help them with their PTSD, or very few places, let's say. And we also wanted a name that, sort of screamed all military. So typically what would happen is that if you were in treatment during your third week, they would sit down with, and a person is called an aftercare specialist. So basically that would say is, okay, let's pretend your name is Charlie. Charlie, you've been here 3 weeks, you're leaving next week, and we've been talking about new places and new faces, new places and new faces. And looking at your file here, Charlie, your home life looks a bit like a goat rodeo. So, where are you going to go next week? Have you thought about sober housing? And the vast majority of people who hear that strongly consider sober housing. There's 20,000 sober houses in the U.S. There's over 300 of them just in the Twin Cities, of which Trinity Sober Homes is part of those. What I learned is that veterans have a very different reaction to that conversation. Their reaction is, heck no, I'm not going to a sober house with a bunch of civilians with corporate weenies like Tim Murray, who got his feelings hurt in a staff meeting, compared to the I've been through. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And so besides they say, you know what, I feel great, I'm strong, I'm a soldier, I'm tough, it's the best I've felt in 20 years, I can do this. And what we know is if you try to do this journey on your own, you're going to struggle or die. And so the plan is that some subsegment of those veterans who have said no to going to a civilian sober house are going to say, you know what, I'm not wild about going to a sober house, but I'm much more likely to talk about those things that I saw that are bothering me, that are contributing to my PTSD, and I'm much more willing to share those with a band of brothers that I know in one way or another understand me, rather than with a bunch of civilians who just don't.
Yeah. So they'd feel more connected and more like at peace, let's say, talking to you about it then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, an example would be is, let's say that I can listen to my daughter or my wife explain to me all they want about the challenges and the real pain of birth pain, having a child. The best I'm going to do is when I get done with that conversation is turn to another guy and go, sounds like it hurt, but I got no clue, right? There's no way I can ever relate. Well, in the same way you wouldn't put a bunch of guys to talk about their pain compared to women with birth pain, you wouldn't put civilians to talk to veterans, because it's just two different things. And it would be silly to think that somehow one group could relate to the other.
Yeah. And as an executive director of Bravo Zulu House, could you outline the goals of the facility?
Sure. So unlike other business, we're a nonprofit organization. So that means we're not in it for the money. Okay? So we're in this to help veterans. And having been a business person in the past, when you run a business, you typically have 2 or 3 high-level goals. They're called key metrics, or they have a dashboard, and usually it involves some type of growth number, whether it's revenue or sales, and then profit. In the nonprofit world, we have different goals and different objectives. So ours, the very first goal we have is that every single one of us, every single man that's living in that house, goes to bed tonight, one day at a time, sober. Which is why we focus on sobriety rates. We don't focus on how many men we've helped, even though we've helped over 450 men so far in 13 years. We focus on how many guys are we helping to stay sober. And it's a balancing act, because we believe in this 12-step program that there's a spiritual element, and that I'm powerless over another person's drug addiction and alcoholism. At the same time, there are better environments to be in to give somebody the chance, if they're willing to put in the work, that they would do that. So the thinking really is that our first and primary goal is, how do we create an environment where every single guy that wants to be there and is willing to do the work how do we make sure that there aren't anything that's going to impede them staying sober? Which means we're going to help them get a job. We're going to provide, all kinds of support at the house. They're going to have transportation. So all of the reasons that somebody would use to say, wow, my life is just so frustratingly difficult, which it can be, right? No job, no transportation. And just because you have a place to live, that's nice, but sometimes that's not enough to feel like I'm really contributing to society. So we want to have all of that inside these four walls at this beautiful home up in northern Martin County.
And how does Bravo Zulu House differ itself from other recovery programs or sober living homes, especially in its approach from PTSD and SUD?
So as I mentioned before, there are about 20,000 sober houses in the U.S. And most sober houses do a very good job of creating an environment where everybody in the house is sober. There's routine either drug tests or breathalyzers. And if somebody is caught using, they're typically asked to leave, and that creates the right environment. To our knowledge, there are absolutely 0 sober houses in the U.S. that are, 1, all military, 2, they offer what I would call good, solid, sober support, and 3, they offer PTSD therapy, particularly combined with animal therapy. This is a unique model, and all the data says that if you put these together, we ought to have exceptional results. So I fully expect to be sitting right here in 2 years and saying, look, this was our plan, and then here's been the results. But what differentiates us the most would be the combination of we're all military, it's an extraordinarily high quality living environment, it's going to be a beautiful farm, and lastly is they're going to get support for their PTSD, and they can stay as long as they want. So some guys might stay 6 months. Our average length of stay at Trinity Sober Homes is about 18 months, which is one of the reasons why our recovery rates are so high.
Is because you let them take their time and not very much be rushed.
Absolutely. Father Fleming told me that when you cook brownies, and maybe you know this, is most brownies you have to cook them for 20 minutes at 350 degrees. Well, being a math guy, I thought, well, I just cook them for 10 minutes at 700 degrees. Some things take 20 minutes, is what he told me. So there's just some things that take time. And that period of time when I was a cucumber and then became a pickle, I didn't become a pickle overnight. I'm not going to get sober and stay sober overnight. I'm going to have to, the technical term is I'm going to have to rehabituate, right? I have to develop new habits.
Can you walk us through the unique services and support system that Bravo Zulu House will offer veterans dealing with PTSD and substance misuse disorder?
Yeah, so we've talked about a couple of those. So the services will be, first of all, every veteran that comes in will be assigned both a spiritual coach as well as a PTSD therapist. There's no other sober houses in the country that do that. Next is they'll also be assigned a dog, and Ava will be with Pause for Cause. We'll interview each man, and they'll say, okay, Charlie, looks like based on what you're telling me and where you're at, it looks like maybe a Cocker Spaniel will be the best match for you. And Ava has this network of shelters around the Midwest, and she'll go find a Cocker Spaniel or something close to that. Bring the Cocker Spaniel in, and then you, Charlie, the Cocker Spaniel, and Ava will work together on doing some training to the point where you're able to manage the dog, and the dog's not managing you, and that it's working for you. So those are probably the major components. The other is we also plan to do a hydroponic farming operation. So we've got a big 100-foot by 60-foot pole barn that's there, and having some dignified employment that's on site might be a really good help for some guys that are coming out of treatment that may not be quite ready to go into a job. And there's over 4,000 jobs open within 30 minutes of the farm. So whether it's Mankato, Blue Earth, Fairmont, there's a significant number of employers who will be interested. But some of our guys might not be quite ready, so we want to have at least 2 or 3 full-time jobs on the property managing this hydroponic farming operation. That will provide employment for 2 or 3 men so they can ease their way from treatment into the sober house, a job. We'll pay them 15 to 20 bucks an hour for that job. And then when they're ready, we'll help them go find a job locally. Either they'll have their own transportation, or a number of the car dealers will be generous and be helping us with that.
And what factors led you to choose Martin County, Minnesota as a location for Bravo Zulu House?
Great question. So our legacy organization, Trinity Sober Homes, is really well anchored in the Twin Cities. As we began to look at what opportunities there were for an all-military sober house, there were several factors we looked at. First and foremost is cost. And it's very obvious that real estate in the Twin Cities costs a lot more than real estate outside the Twin Cities. The second is I wanted to make sure that because people are saying, gee, Tim, this is such a good idea, you know, there might be 100 of these in 10 years. I don't know. I've learned that I'm an operations guy, and so I used to have bosses that would say, hey, Murray, great idea. Why don't you go do it once in a row and then get back to me? Okay? So we're just going to do this once in a row. But if it was going to be successful, I wanted to set it up for success as much as possible. So if you look at the state of Minnesota, as you get south of about Northfield, and you go over to Winona, and you go all the way across to Worthington, that section of the state is extremely supportive of military veterans. Real estate costs are lower, and so I started about a year ago in Winona, driving over 50,000 miles over the last year, and what happened was I kept bumping into Martin County people. I kept bumping into people saying, well, have you thought about Martin County? Have you thought about Fairmont? And we have our spiritual retreat for our Trinity men, which is over in the Waseca County area. And frankly, I was like, well, you know, that's 90 minutes from the cities. You know, Fairmont, I don't know, that's like an hour from here. But I've learned that I'm not in the outcome business. That's God's job. I'm in the input business, right? I've been fired from the outcome business. So I just said, well, let's just wait and see what happens. So we started having some meetings, and all of a sudden, you know, Pam Krill from the American Legion at the state, Mike Maxa from the state American Legion, Steve Fosness from the Fairmont, Doug Landsteiner from the Martin County CVSO, Pete Henniger from the Fairmont VFW, and Butch Whitehead from the state DAV, Disabled American Veterans, and everything kept coming back to Fairmont or Martin County. So, you know, I've sort of signed up for this spiritual journey where every once in a while you got to go, okay, I guess we're going to Martin County.
Yeah.
So we just put a stake in the ground last summer, and since then it's just been wonderful. The community support, both from the veterans as well as the business, and then the spiritual community. You know, I've been involved with the Ministerial Association, a number of the pastors, Father Dobbs locally. So it's just been an overwhelming amount of positive feedback that clearly has said, this is where we want, you know, this.
Yeah. And who will be eligible to access services provided by Bravo Zulu House, and what criteria will you be using in sectioning the resident?
Yeah, so good question. So first of all, they need to be men. The second is that we're going to use some language that I'm not yet educated on. So not being a veteran, we're going to be hiring a veteran to be basically the commander of Bravo Zulu House. So I know that there are terms like, you know, you're a veteran if you have a certain discharge status. The reality is we're probably going to take veterans that aren't necessarily considered veterans by some organizations. So the VA might say, I'm sorry, if you had a dishonorable discharge, you might not be eligible for benefits. Well, I can guarantee you this, one of the main reasons a vet would have a dishonorable discharge is because they had drugs and alcohol problem or PTSD. So those guys we want to welcome with open arms. So we'll be reviewing that, but you know, big picture, the answer is that we're going to take anybody who served in a military branch at some point in their life, but the more important part is that they've gone to treatment. And people don't quite understand this, and I find I have to say it a few times. We're not talking about taking a homeless vet and throwing him in our houses. Those guys, they need a lot of help. We can't provide the level of care that typically they need. What we're working with are one of those 240,000 men that are coming out of treatment every year that are anywhere from doctors and lawyers and dentists to mechanics and farmers, basically all walks of life. And they just happen to be a veteran, and they happen to have decided somebody intervened. A judge, a wife, a daughter. Somebody said, hey, Charlie, it's time to go to treatment. Okay? So the most important part is all of our men that are veterans are going to be coming to us from a treatment facility. That's the primary criteria. And then the secondary criteria is, in some way, you had to, I'm going to let the veterans themselves, the people we hire and the organizations we partner with, really determine who's eligible and who's not. You know, because if it was up to me, I'd probably say yes to everybody, but we got to make sure that they're truly all veterans.
In what ways do you incorporate faith and spirituality into the recovery process at Bravo Zulu House, and how do you believe this improves the outcome for residents?
So, great question. So the whole idea of is there a God, isn't there a God, and my experience with the religion of my childhood oftentimes can send people scurrying, either to the corners or into raging debates. And we're really sort of the opposite. What we think is that if you're going to come and embrace a 12-step approach, which is what we are, we're a 12-step based organization, and whether it's Trinity or Bravo Zulu, you're not required to be of any system of faith. You don't have to be Catholic or Lutheran or Jewish or Islam. You don't have to be any of those. What you do have to believe is that there is something called a higher power, and it's not named Charlie or Tim. Now, as easy as you may think that is, we probably reject one of every 3 candidates who just aren't there. Most of the men that will be coming to us have probably had some level of experience with the 12-step program, and most likely the reason they relapsed is they just chose to not figure out this higher power question. So our spiritual coaches basically will nuzzle up next to the resident and say, okay, do you think that there's something out there that's making the earth spin, the sun come up and down every day, the leaves turn, the corn to grow? Do you think there's something out there that's causing all that to happen, or is that just totally random? Nah, there probably is. Okay. Is it you? No. Great. We're off to a good start, right? Because once we open that door of willingness, so our residents are going to be asked, simply open and crack this door of willingness. Are you willing to consider the possibility that your conceptions of the universe, your role in the universe, and this higher power, imagine if each of us were carrying around an extension cord or a cord attached to us. So what I learned was what I did was I took this cord, this power cord, you can't see it, but it's right here. You see it? Okay. And I plugged it into money, and then I plugged it into women, and then I plugged it into booze and drugs and fame. And maybe for some periods of time, I may have gotten some energy from those, but eventually all of those batteries ran dead. So then I'm running around basically with this cord in my hand, and I made then the ultimately dumb decision. I know, I'll plug this into me. It's my life, and I know what's best for me. Like, really? How's that working out for you? So most of us come into a sober house and into treatment, we're not on a winning streak, right? So usually bad things have happened. We're good, sick people who have done some bad things. So what we ask guys is, are you open to the possibility that there's something called another power source out there? Call it God, call it higher power, whatever you want. But are you willing to unplug it from yourself and plug it into something else and then take direction? And I think veterans are actually going to be, I have some veterans that are sponsees of mine, and I find they take direction a lot better than us civilians because they're used to taking orders. So the idea would be is the spiritual coach plus their PTSD therapist is going to help them figure out how committed are they to plugging into this higher power. And our experience is the more committed I am to plugging into this higher power and then trying these new experiences, the more likely I'm going to start having less problems in my life. I'm going to stay sober, and all of a sudden I'm going to start feeling better about myself. And then we can really start to address this PTSD issue you've got, which is very real for these guys.
And could you share any success stories from individuals who have benefited from Trinity Homes or similar programs?
Sure. So I think, as I indicated, so we have the highest post-treatment recovery rate in the nation at 71%, which is quite spectacular. We're one of the few nonprofit sober houses, and we attribute all of that not to us. I mean, if I say spectacular, it sounds like, we're spectacular. No, what we've learned is that if you create an environment where men can come together, and of the 450 men that we have put through our program, have lived with us, about 100 of those have been veterans. And so we have several veterans who help me regularly. They've been down to Albert Lee. They've been here in Fairmont. They're on our website. You can see videos of them. And basically what they're saying is, look, I was in the Navy or the Army or the Marines, and Trinity has really benefited me for these reasons, are the ones we've discussed today. And I completely expect that to be true with Bravo Zulu House.
And any other closing thoughts?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for being a guest here today. You're terrific. Our country is in great hands if you're an example of our youth, so good job. Second is that if any of the viewers, if I brought up some points or questions that they have that I didn't answer, they can always go to our website, which is Bravo Zulu House, that's spelled out, bravozuluhouse.org. So that's bravozuluhouse.org. There's a lot of information on there, as well as contact information to answer any questions that your viewers might have.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Coffee and Clarity, Preventing Substance Misuse. Remember, by spreading awareness and supporting projects like these, we can help play a part in fostering a brighter future for those struggling with addiction and PTSD. Stay tuned for more conversations, and until next time, see ya.